Today we're going to learn about the Mongols. That link is to the crash course, which you already watched separately. The Mongols created the largest continuous land empire ever. So you can see they touched on China, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, Russia, and of course Mongolia. Here's a little bit about the Mongols before Genghis Khan rose to power. So the Mongols were pastoral nomads, which means that they moved around to find food for their herds of sheep and goats. Most of their diet was meat and milk from their herds. They did eat some grains and vegetables that they got through trade with others, so they were not really farmers. The basic unit of Mongol life was the tribe, so they were organized around tribes and clans. Before Genghis Khan, these tribes were mostly independent and they often went to war against each other and only came together when they were under threat. One thing that's different about the Mongols than a lot of other societies is that women had more rights and more power in their society than a lot of other places at the time. Their leaders were elected, which is also different than a lot of other civilizations at the time. They had no written language, and their religion was shamanistic. So shamans, you might remember from the first unit, were religious men who were believed to be able to communicate with spirits. This is where the Mongols came from. They came from the steppes of Central Asia. And so you can see it's a very harsh environment, and that probably explains why they developed as they did. It also explains why they were herders and not farmers. So Genghis Khan, also called Chinggis Khan, was born in the 1170s when the Mongols were very divided. His family was abandoned by their tribe after his father was murdered, and he came to power through a system of alliances and generally just developed a reputation as a really fierce fighter and a good military leader. In 1206, he was elected Great Khan, which is what Genghis Khan actually means, and he set out conquering land. So I like to say the reason Genghis Khan was so successful is that he took this fighting energy, like it was almost in their blood, the Mongols, that they rode horses and fought. But throughout history, they had fought each other. Genghis Khan took that energy and directed it towards other people. So he's kind of saying, rather than fight each other, we're going to use this energy to go fight others and conquer and make a big empire. So what made the Mongols so successful? There's a lot of different things. Genghis Khan reorganized the entire military into fighting units of different numbers. He did this to break up tribal groups. So like if all of us in this class are one tribe, when we went into the Mongol army under Genghis Khan, he wouldn't let us stay together. He would put us in all different units so that we weren't loyal just to our tribe, but we were loyal to the Mongol army overall. The military had strict discipline, so members who disobeyed orders would be shot on the spot. They were excellent horse riders. So cavalry are fighters on horseback. The Mongols totally excelled at this. They appointed their leaders based on merit, which means based on their strengths and who did the best job, not just based on like family loyalties or something like that. Their leaders ate and slept in the same places as their men to emphasize that they were all in it together, and that their leaders weren't necessarily better than anyone else. When they incorporated conquered people into their military, they also spread them throughout different units like I talked about. So they were extremely capable horseback riders. They were able to cover 62 miles a day, which doesn't sound like that a lot today, but at this time, I mean, that's a huge distance to cover, and that allowed them to sneak up on their enemy. They also were really adaptable. So when they came to China, like they had never seen fortifications like the Great Wall and other fortifications, but they adapted techniques. So they, for example, learned about cannons and gunpowder from China. They also used catapults to deal with these huge fortifications that they didn't have in their own civilization. They also were really good at military strategy, things like faking retreats, and then they would come back even stronger. Genghis Khan was a master of all those things. The conquered people they used to build infrastructure for things like roads and bridges, and that helped facilitate movement throughout their empire. So they built those things recognizing that it would allow them to move their military around much more quickly. They also used cruelty as a weapon of terror. So often people as like word spread about the Mongols, people would surrender sometimes in the hopes that they wouldn't be killed because they heard so much about, that the Mongols were just going to come and slaughter everyone. And so they hoped that by surrendering, they would spare some lives. The Mongols also took a detailed census in conquered lands, so they counted the people to increase tax revenue. They also set up relay stations across their empire. And we learned about caravanserai in the Muslim world. This is a similar idea. Diplomacy was also important to the Mongols. So they set up embassies with foreign governments. They also, really, really important thing here, they resettled conquered people where they could best serve the Mongol Empire. So the Mongols did recognize their weaknesses, that they didn't have in their civilization a lot of like scholars and artisans or bureaucrats, but they realized that that was going to be important if they were going to govern a huge empire for the first time. And so when they conquered new places, they sought out those people and then moved them around the empire where they could serve the Mongols best. So this map represents the Mongols at the height of their territory. You can see it became divided into 4 different kingdoms called khanates. The red arrows are the campaigns or the military campaigns of Genghis Khan. Another important time period within Mongol history is the Pax Mongolica. So this is a period of peace and prosperity. And that may sound weird because we just talked about how the Mongols were really fierce conquerors, but once they took over all this territory, it was relatively safe within that territory, and that helped facilitate trade. The Mongols were also very tolerant, so they didn't believe that other people should adopt their shamanistic religion, and a lot of Mongol rulers, like Kublai Khan, for example, were really interested in learning about other religions. And so as they conquered people, they allowed them to freely practice their own religions. They also, during this time, established Karakoram as the capital in Mongolia. And in general, it was a period of a lot of cultural borrowing and diffusion because you could move within the Mongol Empire relatively safely. And so a lot of trade occurred, and we know with trade, people spread also ideas and culture. So the Mongols are really credited with helping to revive the Silk Road. So after the classical period, the Silk Road kind of fell a little bit into disuse. The Tang dynasty in China revived it a little bit, and then it kind of fell again. The Mongols, because they united this whole territory, people could move relatively easily along the Silk Road through that Mongol Empire. And so they connected or reconnected areas in Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. They also helped protect the Silk Road. So the soldiers from the Mongol military helped protect traders along the way. They had at the different rest stops. Trade typically was a very, very dangerous thing because they don't have, police forces like we do today. And so when they're just out there moving around with all these valuable products, it was often very common that they would be robbed. And so the Mongols worked to try to fix some of those issues. Along with trade routes, diffusion of culture and inventions like gunpowder spread. So the Mongols are credited with introducing gunpowder, for example, to Europe, which they learned about in China. Ideas spread, and negative diseases also spread. So soon we're going to learn about the Black Death and the spread of the bubonic plague, which a lot of historians think was due to the Mongols moving around so much. So here's a map of the spread of the Black Death, and the spread of the Black Death was an outbreak of bubonic plague. It was a pandemic in the 1300s. Trade routes are in the dashed lines, and the progress of the Black Death is in the dark black lines. So you can see what a lot of historians think is that it originated somewhere over in Asia and then spread through Silk Road trade over to Africa and then to Europe. So overall impacts of the Mongols, and why should we care about the Mongols? They created the largest continuous land empire ever, larger than even the Roman Empire. They revitalized trade during the Pax Mongolica. They built roads and guarded trade routes to encourage trade. They learned how to centralize power. So, for example, they created more uniform law codes throughout their empire. Mongol women were more independent than in a lot of other civilizations at the time. They were very, very advanced fighters on horseback. The Mongols actually mostly their weapons that they used were bow and arrows, but they became very, very skilled at shooting their bows and arrows while riding their horses. The Mongol use of cannons, which they learned about from the Chinese, led to a decline in city fortifications and city walls because you could just break through them with cannons. And there were also religions that were spread because of the Mongols. So, for example, Islam came to China. Now, it didn't really take over China or establish a huge following in China, but it spread as far as China as a result of these interactions under the Mongols.